YouTube, once again, it's Kennard Vernon Stewart here for the podcast today. We're talking a little SEC football here, where it's always great to be an Auburn Tiger. On the plains of Auburn, the battle cry is War Eagle. We're talking a little SEC football as we get ready for fall camp. One thing that came to mind to me today, I was looking at social media, and I've been, I kind of look at social media off and on to see what the going trends and what, some of the fans of different football fan bases are talking about. And one of the main ongoing topics is Alabama and their cupcake schedule. Now, mind you, pretty much every team that Alabama plays, they pretty much demolish, okay? Now, going into this season, the bettors out in Las Vegas says that in all of Alabama's SEC competition this year, they should win by double digits. Who is that a knock on? How is that a knock on Alabama? Now, as a disclaimer, I in no form or fashion advocate anything positive for the University of Alabama. As a matter of fact, I hope they lose every game they play. However, we got to be truthful, and we have to stop being lazy about this. Alabama does not purposely set up their schedule to make a clear, easy path to the SEC championship. Their path to the SEC championship is not much different than, say, even Auburn. Because you look at Auburn's schedule, they got Oregon to start the season off with. Oregon is not a documented top 10, top 15 team in the country. They probably will be, and they probably have the talent to do so. But when Auburn made this particular schedule, Oregon was not that team, okay? Also, when you look at you got to look at a couple of different factors here. A lot of the teams that fans want Alabama to play, they don't want to play Alabama, okay? Do you think Clemson wants to start their season off with Alabama? They probably going to wind up playing them again anyway, and it serves them no purpose to play a team like Alabama. You look at all the years Alabama has made efforts to schedule Power 5 teams, whether it was Clemson, whether it was Penn State, whether it is USC. It's not like they're not playing the same levels of non-conference games than any other team in the SEC. What's the difference between scheduling Louisville, for example, last year, who were actually trending towards being a good team? It just so happens that Alabama plays Louisville and Lamar Jackson is no longer there, and they pretty much overpower Louisville. Who would have thought that when Auburn scheduled, say, Oregon, that Oregon and Auburn would turn into what could be a colossal matchup in Power 5 football here in the 2019 season. So I think it's a real lazy, maybe even irresponsible thing to say that Alabama's purposely schedules a cupcake schedule, when each year, at least for the past few years, they have scheduled a Power 5 team in either the ACC or, the Pac-12. Scheduled USC a few years ago. Who would have thought that Alabama would have beat them 52-6? All of a sudden now, retroactively, now that's a cupcake game. Just because Alabama blows these teams out, that's not a knock to Alabama. That's more so of a knock to the teams they play. You schedule the teams. If you beat the hell out of them, it is what it is. So we can't keep retroactively saying that Alabama has a cupcake schedule when you look at the schedule right offhand. Now, don't get me wrong. I think 2019 Duke is probably an exception to the rule. But then let's say the teams who are available that particular week, because scheduling is also based on availability. Why would Clemson schedule Alabama as their first game of the week when a couple of weeks later they have Texas? I mean, not Texas, but Texas A&M. Why even would Notre Dame schedule LSU when they have Georgia down the road? It just, from a scheduling standpoint, it just doesn't make sense. Who do the fans want Alabama to play? Do you want them to have a schedule that looks like Oklahoma, Wisconsin one week, then the next week you play up against Penn State, then the next week you play against Miami? Let's just say if Alabama, typically Miami has a pretty good team. Alabama couldn't schedule Miami because they're already playing against Florida. Okay, we're by no means making excuses for Alabama, but let's be a little bit more realistic about the whole cupcake nature of the scheduling. Okay, it is not Alabama's fault that they pretty much blow through their conference. Yes, they do have teams like University of Louisiana Monroe, but also when you look at say LSU, for example, they have, I think, a Lamar on the schedule. You know, so why aren't we criticizing those schedules? I'm gonna tell you why we're not criticizing those schedules. It's because we feel like since Alabama has all these top 5 recruits, we don't feel like their schedules complements their level of talent. And there's no way that their schedule is going to complement their level of talent, because teams that could play on their level of talent week in and week out, they're already in the SEC and should, based on the recruiting classes, these teams should be able to play against Alabama on a decent level every single week. You know, since when have, I guarantee you, if Alabama's conference play was a lot more competitive, we probably wouldn't even have this conversation. If Alabama were to, say, lose 2 games in their season, we wouldn't have these conversations. They go undefeated pretty much every year, and then we retroactively look back and say that this is a weak schedule. Let's say going into the Florida State game, I think that game was in 2017. Alabama was ranked like number 1 and Florida State was ranked number 3. Alabama winds up beating Florida State 24-6, I think the score was. Then all of a sudden, as they onslaught through their schedule, now all of a sudden the Florida State game doesn't have the same value. We can't keep basing the value of the schedule based on future results. At that time, Florida State not only was the number 3 team in the country, but they played Alabama for the most part in that game as if they were a top 10 team, up until maybe mid to late third quarter and on to the rest of that football game. So to say that Alabama's scheduling is done purposely to give them an easier route to the college football playoffs, Alabama's route is no different. The only thing is they have by far the strongest roster, one of the strongest rosters in college football, up there with Clemson and Georgia. So pretty much every team that they play against, because of their level of talent, they're going to be favored, and they're going to be favored by double digits in most cases. So what is it? Who do the fans want Alabama to play? You know, most of the teams, like I said before, aren't available during the weeks that they would have played Alabama anyway. They're probably playing a cupcake team too. So let's be a little bit more analytical when we think about this. Yes, maybe Alabama could play Oklahoma, but Oklahoma has no interest in playing an Alabama first game of the season. It serves them no purpose. It serves Clemson no purpose to play Alabama. Absolutely none at all. Especially when they can find a team where the percentage of winning will be a little bit higher. You know, Clemson will play against Auburn because beating Auburn holds some weight, but also you have a higher percentage of beating Auburn because of their schedule. Not that Auburn by far is not a bad team, but because of their roster, you have a better chance of beating them. Also, Notre Dame scheduling Georgia. That's a good game for Notre Dame because, well, now it's not as much, but that's a good game for Notre Dame because they get to play an SEC team or another Power 5 team, may or may not win, but they have a much higher percentage of beating, say, a Georgia than scheduling a Alabama. This argument can go many different ways, but I think to just say at the surface, Alabama's going around purposely not scheduling Power 5 teams is not true. They played West Virginia. They played Clemson. They played USC. Matter of fact, have a game scheduled with USC next year. Pac-12 supposed to be one of the best teams historically in college football. So let me know, guys, what you all think about this particular Alabama cupcake schedule argument, because I just, looking at the schedule, comparing even Auburn's schedule and other schedules in the SEC, I just don't, it's a very manageable schedule for them, and looks to be relatively easy, especially based on their roster. But the teams you want Alabama to play, they don't want to play Alabama, and for good reason. It doesn't make sense. They're not going to make any more money. They're not going to have any more prestige. They probably stand an 80% chance of losing the game. So it doesn't make sense to schedule Alabama. That's probably why Alabama struggles the way they do with filling the schedule, because they may be reaching out to some of these teams to play, and they're like, hell no. What do we gain? Even if we beat you, what do we gain? It's not a win-win situation. Doesn't help them any. Once again, it's Kennard Vernon Stewart here for the podcast, talking a little SEC football. I was just, kind of thinking about this whole Alabama scheduling thing. Let me know what you think. Hey, I may be dead wrong on this one, but this is something that I've been thinking about for a few years, and I just don't see the difference between Alabama's efforts other than the fact that they just pretty much run through everybody they play. So let me know your thoughts. As always, it's great to be an Auburn Tiger on this channel, but we do talk about a little SEC football. As always, War Eagle.